Before I can get to the crimson outer layers that properly represent the Scarlet Witch, there's a very important linen shirt that must be made first. I used this reference from Pemberley as well as blogs from A Factured Fairy Tale and Diary of a Mantua Maker to help me figure out how to put together this shirt. If you're new here, I'm attempting to make an 18th century version of the Scarlet Witch from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I will link the design concept below as well as the video where I make my 18th century stays. You'll see these used throughout my series on making this costume, so if you would like a prequel of sorts, you can go check that out. For this week's project, I learned how to properly cut linen from Bernadette Banner's video on making a pirate shirt. She uses actual historical hand sewing techniques to make a different 18th century shirt, and I highly recommend checking it out if you would like to know the hand sewing stitches on making a shirt from the 18th century. For my project, I will show you how to achieve the same look, but using a sewing machine, French seams, and dare I say, machine embroidered waffles? Before I can actually cut my fabric, I need a pattern. Here's what I came up with for that. Basically a bunch of rectangles, some square gussets for the sleeves, and square gussets folded in half for the shoulder area. For the ruffle, I just doubled the length of the cuff piece. I used bias tape for the tie that attaches to the back and wraps around the front to hold the shirt together. You can either screenshot this view, or if you would like to purchase a downloadable version of this pattern, I will link it below. Let's talk about cutting linen. So handkerchief linen is pretty slippery and likes to move out of shape very easily. Acquiring a perfect square or rectangle takes a bit of work, but it's necessary to help keep the shape of the shirt. Before we do this, make sure your linen has been properly washed and shrunk, because this garment is one that we'll be able to wash in the future. To start, linen is a woven fabric, so it has warp threads which run parallel to the selvage and weft threads that run perpendicular to the selvage. I'm going to find a weft thread, and using a pin, I'm going to pull it up so that it will gather the fabric in front of it. I will continue to pull this thread until I reach a point I have marked for the pattern, or all the way across the width of the fabric. This will leave the slightest gap in the fabric, showing me where to cut to get the straightest edge possible. I repeat this process for all of the pieces in my pattern. In order to save on time, I have my embroidery going while I'm cutting my fabric. If this is uninteresting to you, I will put a timestamp on the screen where I continue with the next part of making my shirt. Starting with my Floriani water-soluble stabilizer, large enough to fit my hoop, I will also cut a piece of tulle, double the width of my hoop, to stitch my lace out onto. The only reason I need the tulle is so that I can gather the embroidery and sew it onto the cuff in the end. Otherwise, if I just wanted freestanding lace, I would stop at the stabilizer and head on over to my machine. I do plan to do a beginner level embroidery for cosplay video coming up, so if that's something you're interested in, I got you. I purchased this embroidery file on Etsy and I will link it below. Now that the first one is done, I need to do one more. This file doesn't call for a second hoop, but I need it so I can have the length of my ruffle long enough so I place my grid plastic over my hoop. Then I take a picture of how the embroidery lines up with the grid, and then I will take my embroidery out of the hoop, trim away the stabilizer. I actually save this because it can be used on my smaller hoop and I really don't want to waste this stuff. Then I can rehoop the new section with stabilizer, and using the plastic grid, I will once again line up my lace the best I can. Repeat this process once again for the second cuff, and then I will let my lace sit in water overnight to break down that water-soluble stabilizer. So now that I have quite successfully cut out all of my linen pieces, and they are all on straight lines. I can actually start putting together the shirt. I did also finish stitching out the embroidery for this. I'm going to be gathering these down, and it's going to be like come at the wrist here. It's a bit more, this embroidery design is a little bit more dense than I would like, but I don't have the time to digitize something to make it work. So I found a $3 design that I think would someday also make like a really beautiful trim at the bottom of a dress or something. I was trying to think like, okay, is this something I could use for other things as well versus just trying to buy something that will work for one project. I don't like that. That doesn't feel great to me. So I'm gonna be using this on the little like floopy part that's gonna hang out of the bottom of the shirt. And I guess the first thing to do is start sewing this together. So starting with the front pieces and back piece at the shoulder, I'm going to pin them together, wrong sides together. Although the right and the wrong sides do look nearly identical, this is kind of something that you can do to note for yourself. Just whatever side you want to be the wrong side, those are going together. I'm pinning all the way up into where I'm actually going to be placing my gusset, but I'm not going to add it yet. I just have it nearby because it's going to help me figure out the placement of it on my neckline like so. I stitched that down with a 3/4 of an inch seam allowance, and now I'm going to prep this seam for a flat felled stitch. So I press my seam open, I pick the front side of the shirt to be trimmed, and then I will fold the back side over the front side, press it, and stitch it down. I chose a flat felled seam because that's what was suggested when I made my partner an 1850s ensemble 2 years ago, and I really loved how that looked. I will admit a French seam would have been a better choice for this, so from here on out all of my seams are French seams instead. While sewing the shoulder seams down, I took the opportunity to also roll the front hem down because I'm not planning on adding a ruffle to the front here. Now time to add the shoulder gussets. Morgan Donner has an amazing video on how to sew gussets that I will link in the cards as well as the description, so I won't go super in depth on this, but I am going to show you like how I did the gusset. So I'm gonna pin the gusset to the back of the shirt with a little bit hanging off, about a 1/2 inch hanging off in the shoulder seam where it meets area. Then once the back has been pinned, I'm gonna take that gap and pin it to the shoulder front piece, and I'm going to add pins in the middle all the way to the front edge that I rolled, and basically we've got this little triangle or like V of pins, and I will go sew that up. And you can see here I can eventually flip it over. We're going to do that next. I'm going to sew this down at 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to do this in 2 pieces. The first in the back side, and then instead of dropping the needle down and turning, I'm going to back stitch and then start a brand new stitch on the front piece. Now my gusset is attached, but I want this shape to be more of a triangle, and I also want the seams to be clean, so I will press them towards the gusset. Then I will fold the gusset in half, creating a triangle, and then fold the raw edges in. I also fold a bit of the front of the shirt inside with it. Once it's pressed and pinned, it's time to sew, and this I will actually hand sew down because it looks cleaner from the right side of the shirt, plus hand sewing just makes me happy.
Cut it just okay.
Eva, what's that? Eva, what do you got? What is that? Eva, is that a sock? Eva, Eva, can I have it? Can I have this sock? Can you drop it? Good girl. Yes. Thank you for my sock. Thank you. Now that I have successfully retrieved my sock from the sock thief Eva, I can add my collar. To do this, I fold the collar in half and sew the end pieces down with about a 1/2 inch gap left from the bottom edge. Then I'm going to flip it right side out, press it, and then I'm going to fold this bottom edge inside on just one piece of the collar. So just on 1/2 of the collar, I will fold in the flap and press it down so I get a nice clean, crisp edge. Then I can pin it to the neck of my shirt and gather the back piece of the shirt to get it to fit into the collar. And I will stitch this down by machine. Since I pressed this folded edge in previously, now I can pin it to the shirt. I did press the connected side up towards the collar to help ease it in place as well. So yesterday I left off with the collar, and today we're going to move on to the sleeves. So we're going to get some gussets in the sleeves. I'm going to be doing French seams for the sleeve bits, and I'm actually going to link a video on how to do the gussets. I'm going to show you me making the gussets, but or the sleeve with the gusset, but Morgan Donner did a really great video on how to do this that I'm actually running to my computer watching to help inform me to do this properly. So instead of trying to repeat what she's already done. Even though I have a serger, I chose to do this with French seams because I wanted to learn and I needed practice. So I pin one side of the gusset to one side of the sleeve part where I plan to attach the sleeve to the shirt. Once the gusset was stitched onto the sleeve and the sleeve was sewn down the seam, it was time to trim all the seam allowances. I sewed these at a 1/2 inch seam allowance and I trimmed them down to a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is so that I can flip it, press it, and sew it up. I completely forgot about the opening at the bottom of the sleeve for the cuff, so I had to go back and seam rip about 6 inches of the bottom of this seam, but I did that, and now we can move back along on our journey of turning these into French seams. After pressing this seam, I'm able to sew it closed, making sure to encase the raw edge within it. For the bottom opening of the sleeve, I just roll the fabric inside itself at the bottom, and that is that. Now let's add the cuff and embroidered ruffly bits. I trimmed the tulle down on the bottom of my lace using applique scissors, and for the top, I cut it at least 1.5 inches away from the top of the design so I could sew a gather stitch into it and attach it to the cuff. I sandwich my gathered lace in between 2 cuff pieces and sew that down. Then I will sew the sides of the cuff, leaving a 1/2 inch open at the bottom like I did with the collar piece. Now that I have two frilly, fluffy sleeves, I should probably attach them to my shirt. I do this with yet another French seam. I managed to gather the top of the sleeve 3 inches on each side of the center point. This is the point in which I will attach it to the shoulder seam, and then 3 inches on each side of that. Then I can attach it wrong sides together, followed by right sides together, which I did following the demonstration by Morgan Donner. I will also say that you could add the sleeves and then the cuff. I just really wanted to have less fabric to deal with when I was sewing the cuff onto the end of the sleeve. For the side seam, I will sew it with a French seam, leaving about 4 inches from the bottom, and then I will roll that inside so that I can have the clean edge I need. Once those were closed up, I decided to add the buttonholes. I do this on the machine because it's just so fast and easy. I can't really justify spending the time to hand do them, although someday I will hand do them because I need to get better. I'm almost done. Now I just need to gather the bottom of the back panel down to 15 inches and then attach bias binding to it so that I can tie the shirt in the front. 15 inches is the desired length because that's about half of my waist measurement. I'm actually 28-inch waist, but I thought 15 inches would be just a good, nice, round, easy number. I don't know why it's round. Anyway, so I'm going to gather this down, and then I'm going to pin my bias strip onto this, and it's going to encapsulate this, but it will not encapsulate the edge of the front. So I cut all of my panels on the selvage so that I did not have to do any kind of rolled hem or anything. I just leave it there. I don't think it looks bad because it is going to get tucked into a couple layers of things. So yeah, but now I'm just going to add the binding to the bottom of this. And when it comes off of the edge of this, I will just sew it straight to itself so that it's a closed piece of bias binding, and then we'll sew some buttons in. So now let's try this sucker on and wrap up this video. Overall, this shirt is fun and a very easy beginner project for those that want to begin garment construction. I personally would have made my shoulder seam about 3 inches shorter on each side and just gathered the back top into the collar more. Also, I would have completely skipped out on the flat felled seam in the shoulder. I think I could have gathered the sleeves down even more as well to create a fullness in the top of the sleeve without the sleeve looking so oversized on me. Also, I could have had the entire garment shorter, and I still can if I want to go back and change it. But all that constructive criticism aside, I love this shirt. I feel like a schmexy vampire about to go hunting for my next snack. So, yeah, this is the end of our journey on making an 18th century linen shirt to go under a riding habit. I will show you some weird B-roll of me dancing to Michael Jackson at this point in the video, and if you like my content, please subscribe, and thank you to all of my patrons for your everlasting love and support, and until next time, happy sewing.